Hey everyone, this is Jonathan Guzman from Guzman 1611, and we're coming to you live tonight with NephilimFree, um, and it's uh, yeah, I hate it when I pull up the live stream and the Hangouts at the same time. It has that weird echo, but yeah, NephilimFree is here, and we're going to be talking mostly about genetic entropy, and basically that's it. So, Neph, you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, sure. I go by NephilimFree. My name is Evan. I've been doing Christian apologetics on YouTube for about 11 years, and elsewhere on the internet. And I have a blog, and I do videos discussing evolution and creation, Christianity, the Bible, philosophy, atheism, all that kind of stuff, anything related to worldviews. And so you want to talk about genetic entropy. Um, it's an established fact that the genome of every living creature, including mankind, is degenerating because of the effects of accruing genetic mutations. The interesting thing is that despite the scientific verification of this, the atheist camp, the evolutionist promoters, are denying that this is a reality for us, that our genomes are dwindling, that the information is being continuously corrupted by mutation. And there's two reasons for that. One is because they believe, they claim that mutation is actually the base mechanism for evolution. So it can't be destroying us when it's supposedly designed has designed all of the features of every living creature. And the thing that supposedly the mechanism which created all the features of every living thing and has caused the diversification of life into the various animals and plants that exist today. So, according to evolutionists, mutation is this grand designer. It does fantastic, amazing things. It has designed the eyeballs of a fly, the intestines of a human being, the brain of a human being, the pincers of a scorpion, and every single structural design of all living things was supposedly designed by random mutations and selected for by natural selection. So, if genetic entropy is true, then that story goes in the commode. It's a lie. It can't be true.
It goes
And
out the
if
window.
yes, it's not. It can't be true. Both can't be true. So this is why they despise the scientific evidence that the genome of human beings is simply being degraded by and continuously by mutation, because that's the mechanism they claim is actually the grand designer. It's actually a grand destroyer, a destroyer of genetic information, and it's moving organisms towards extinction, not designing things and causing evolution. So, and now if all that's true, then the whole atheist worldview falls apart, because atheism is a philosophical materialist worldview. Now, you might find that an atheist, when you mention this to them, they'll go into denial about their own worldview and say, no, it's not. And atheism doesn't entail materialism specifically, but it really does. It absolutely does. And they're just denying that because they don't have what it takes to defend philosophical materialism. So you'll find that a lot of lay people, atheists today, will deny that philosophical materialism is atheism is dependent upon it being true. Um, but then, if you ask an atheist, well, do you have a spirit? They'll say no. So they deny the spirit. Well, they ask them what is information, and say, well, genetic information, all information is non-physical fundamental entity. It's not. It doesn't have any mass or dimension. It exists, but it's not a physical thing. It's not tangible. It's not comprised of, nor is it a property of matter. And they'll say, no, that's not true. See, so no matter what you ask them about materialism, they'll defend materialism. But then if you tell them atheism depends on materialism, they'll deny it and say no. See, they're contradicting themselves. So the whole atheist worldview, because it's dependent upon philosophical materialism, it falls apart. It's gone. It cannot be supported if this is true, that genetic mutations are denigrating the genome of mankind and are not the grand designer the evolutionists have been claiming since it was discovered what DNA is. That it is, in fact, a package of information that, predefines all of the structural designs and much of the biochemistry of an organism. So they have to deny the scientific evidence that has shown us that mutations are a designer, they're a destroyer. And but the problem for them is that they cannot continue to do it indefinitely. There must come a point at some time when scientists simply throw up the secular mainstream scientists simply throw their hands up and say, look, the game is over. Mutation isn't doing it. It does not design everything. It, in fact, is a destroyer. Everything is moving towards extinction because of mutation. We were designed. They'll have to admit it at some point in the future. The unfortunate thing is, though, even though they'll acknowledge finally, eventually, after it's pried from their cold, dead hands, that mutation is not a designer and is, in fact, a destroyer, and life was, in fact, designed, they still won't acknowledge God as that designer. They'll say aliens, and some are already doing so. With this panspermia idea or the alien designers theory, that aliens have designed us, some other entity, intelligence from somewhere in the universe, but it can't be that God, can't be that Bible God, because they despise that idea. So eventually the game will be over for them. It can't go on forever because of the evidence is just so consistent and going and constantly being discovered more and more profound evidence that genetic entropy is a fact. So they can't play the game forever. At some point, they're going to have to acknowledge life was designed. But again, they are not going to acknowledge that God did it because these people despise God, the atheists that rule academia today. So the only way that evolution, creationism would take over, is if the world was to radically change and worldviews radically change, and everybody was to become a Christian. And we can't expect that to happen. We don't expect that to happen. The Bible tells us we can't, that's not going to happen until at least after Christ returns. But the evidence for genetic mutation being a destroyer is very extensive, and it goes back a very long time. Um, since about the 1930s, early 1930s, scientists began mutating creatures by irradiating them. Like in a microwave oven, but not a microwave. They would irradiate them with X-rays and whatnot, and cause mutations to occur. Then they would observe the effects of the mutation upon the organism. So since then, about 1 million studies have been conducted in mutation. Excuse me, just 1 second. My wife's calling me. I'll be right back.
All right. So Neff will be back in a minute. Let me mute him real quickly so that. Actually, not. Let me not mute him, cause yeah. All right. So yeah, it's this weird silence. Yeah, this weird silence happens when no, you don't have anything to say. Yeah, so I just started getting into this genetic entropy stuff. It's very fascinating topic. I I like to go into it more than what I do. That's why I have Neff here, and yeah. So I'm trying to deepen my knowledge into this genetic entropy. Yeah. All right, just a minute. All right, so yeah. Neff, I'll have to mute himself. All right, guys. So yeah. The link to Neff's blog is in the chat. and so is his YouTube channel. I'll post those two in the description if you want to check them out. But they're also uh they're also on the chat if you need them. Yeah, so check out the blog, guys. I find it interesting to read. All right,
Hey,
not
you there?
further. Okay, good. Yep.
Okay.
Uh,
I didn't know what happened. My microphone got muted.
oh yeah, I
Um,
muted you.
oh,
Yep.
okay. All right.
Just so, yeah, just in
Okay.
case.
So, I have a couple of friends that might want to join unless you want to just keep it me and you.
No, it's okay. You can invite.
Okay. I'll send them the link in the email. I don't know if they'll want to join or not, but I'll do it. Give me just a second. Let's see here.
I've had Standing for Truth and Raw Matt
I'll have you.
on my channel before, so
Yeah.
you shouldn't be like a complete stranger to my viewers. Yeah, but yeah. So Neff, I have a list of questions here and
Sure.
uh right here. Yeah. So um can you answer questions right now, or are you?
Absolutely. Yes.
All right.
Sure.
All right. Awesome. My first question is: did you ever believe in evolution? And if so, then what made you switch?
I did. I believed in evolution until I was about 43 or so, years old. 44. I'm 57 now. I
Hmm.
believed it because I was told it was true. I didn't bother investigating it. I just accepted it. I trusted that the scientific community knew what they were talking about and that they had the evidence. So, because they declared so vehemently the evolution is a fact, they describe it all the time as a scientific fact. My mind was indoctrinated by the numerous television programs that were on TV about evolution. You see it everywhere on TV and you read about it. And I believed it because I trusted the scientific community knew what they were talking about. And then I was exposed to creationist information on the internet, and it caused me to become incredibly curious about this. I didn't even know there was a controversy over whether or not evolution was true. And so I began a campaign of studying to comparing the evidences provided by the creationist camp and the evolutionist camp over a period of about 5 months, intensively, very intensively studying day and night, every minute that I had free. I'd come home from work, and do everything I had to do, go straight to my computer and start reading. And the evidence was so one-sided that I just couldn't believe I was continuing to investigate to try to convince myself evolution wasn't true. After it wasn't very long, it was a couple of weeks, but I continued my investigation because I'm a very hard-nosed person. If I'm going to believe a thing, there better be profound evidence for it, and it really must be a lot. It must be very strong. And I was determined to know that I had absolutely shut every single door on evolution theory in my mind, that there was no way that it was true, and I was just not seeing the picture some way. So I studied and studied and studied for 5 months, and looking back on that, I see it as almost ridiculous that I took 5 months to convince myself that I had absolutely covered every single subject necessary to prove to myself unequivocally it was not possible for evolution to be true and the creation was a fact. Looking back, I'm almost embarrassed by myself for that, because it should not have taken me 5 months. It um, to do that. I was pretty convinced that creation was true and evolution was a false after just a couple of weeks, 2 weeks or three. of investigating at the most 2 or 3 weeks. But I wanted to make absolutely sure that I wasn't missing anything. I find it kind of bizarre that I went ahead and just to convince myself, I studied for so long. And after about 5 months, I threw my hands up and I said to myself, okay, that's it. I've covered every single subject of evolution that's there, every one. And I've examined every claim the evolutionists make, and I've studied every rebuttal to those claims that creationists provide, every one. And there is not one shred of scientific reason to believe in evolution, and there is every scientific reason to believe creation is true. Every reason to believe. All the evidence was in favor of creation, and there was no evidence for evolution. The only thing you could call maybe evidence for evolution is the way in which certain data is interpreted. You can interpret certain data with an evolutionary mindset, and it seemed to be true on its face value. But that's when you have to take the cover off the box and look inside. And when you do, you'll find that that subject, whatever it is, that information actually doesn't support evolution at all. It just can look like it on the surface if you don't go into it deeper. Like, uh, for example, mountains. They'll say mountains are millions. They rise over mountains of the earth are rising by a centimeter or something, or a fraction of a centimeter, a few millimeters every year, and so that means over millions of years. That's how the mountain got so big. And logically, that sounds true. Oh, okay. See how you can interpret that as being true, that uniformitarianist idea that mountains did, in fact, rise over millions of years. Oh, so on the surface, it looks true. But if you look into it deeper, you'll find the mountains actually rose rapidly during the flood of Noah. And the fact that they're still rising very slowly, very, very slowly, not all of them, but many of them are still rising very, very slowly, doesn't mean that uniformitarianism is true and the mountain rose over to its current height over millions of years. It just means that they're still rising because there's still pressure in the continents left over from the flood of Noah, from their movement during the flood, and they're still rising ever so slowly. But they did not get to their height by this very slow process. See, so and the same can be said of certain things in evolution. You can look at them, and on the surface value, they seem to support evolution if you interpret them one way. But then when you dig into them a little more, you'll find out, it really doesn't actually support evolution. So, but as for genetic entropy, uh, mutations are the cause of almost every single disease that is known to mankind. Uh, the vast majority of diseases are caused by malformed proteins. That is, a mutation affects the code that produces a protein in the DNA, the genetic code that defines a protein, prescribes it. And but when a mutation occurs to it, it changes that code in such a way that the protein that's produced from that code is malformed. It doesn't fold into its structural shape the way it was intended to when it was designed. And the result of that slight difference in the shape of that protein causes a disease, or that a protein code is changed in such a way that it's expressed much more frequently than it's supposed to, an overproduction of that protein. And sometimes those proteins will literally damage the brain over time, and that's the result of Tay-Sachs disease and some others, is an excess amount of a particular protein. When you have too much, it's not just the protein has to be the right shape, you have to regulate it too. It has to be produced in the right amount. Too much or too little results in disease. Too little can result in something like hypoglycemia, where you're not able to manufacture ATP enough, or too much can result in things like Tay-Sachs disease, where your brain is literally eaten up by the proteins. Proteins are the cause. Malformed proteins caused by random mutation are the single greatest cause of diseases. So you have to wonder, how is it that the process that causes almost every disease known to mankind, is this process that somehow has designed all the fantastic features of every living thing? See, it doesn't even make sense. So if on its surface, on its face value. So did you have? I tend to be long-winded. What other question do you have for me? What questions do you have? What's your next one?
Yeah, good explanation, Neff. Yeah. So before we go to the next one, I'd like to let Raw Matt speak a little bit, say hi, whatever. Right?
Yeah. Hey guys, how's it
Hey,
going?
not good. How are you?
Good, good. I didn't even really know about this, so I saw you pop up live and thought I would jump in.
Cool. Yeah.
Talking
Yeah.
about
So
genetic degradation, huh?
yeah. Again.
Yeah, it's okay. That's a good one. That's a unique topic because a lot of people look around and they see disease and they see sickness, and they kind of, they question why in the world are there so many diseases, but yet we're evolving up in a linear fashion. That's a good question because, if we were to evolve from a bacteria-like substance, think about it. How many genes does a bacteria have? They have about 1,500. Well, humans have about 19,000 genes. So now we have to have a progression where bacteria are continuously making amino acids, they're continuously making genes, and they're constantly going through beneficial mutations. And we know from experiments, even the longest running known experiment that there is with the Linsky experiment, it's akin to 1.5 million years of human evolution. And all those bacteria have ever done is back themselves into a corner to live. So if they can't prove it, then it's still a myth.
Yep.
That's right. The evolutionists will say that those bacteria are stronger because, I was in a debate not long ago with Dr. Saigard. He's a PhD biologist, and he was telling me before we entered that debate, I was in a magic sandwich show for briefly, and Dr. Gart, told me that the Lenski experiment showed that the bacteria were stronger. But Matt, you and I know that's not true. That's the opposite of the truth. Those bacteria become weakened by those mutations because while they're able to gain an immunity maybe to something, what it shows, like an antibiotic or something, what it shows is that the bacteria become so dependent on the particular type of sugar they're fed in that particular environment that if those bacteria are loosed into the natural environment back where they came from, what happens? They die because they can't handle it anymore. They become so specialized to live in that petri dish in a lab that they take them out of that environment and they die. So they've been weakened. So Lenski's experiment showed that the 500th and 5,000th and 50,000th generation of those bacteria that he has bred were all stronger. I mean, the 5,000th was, the 500th and the 5,000th were stronger than the 50,000th. So the more mutations and more generations of these breeds in the lab, the weaker and weaker they're becoming. The more specialized they are, and the weaker the more susceptible to death they are when they're removed from that specialized environment.
Yeah, and one thing that I
Right.
find really funny is they say, look at how much faster they age. What are you kidding me? How is that beneficial? Think about your own life and you're
Yeah.
aging faster now. That's not beneficial in any way. That's
Oh
ridiculous.
wow! Are you telling me it wouldn't be a good thing if humankind was to die at the age of 20 forevermore?
Right, isn't that crazy? Yeah, the second you start thinking about yourself in that thing, it doesn't make any sense on why they think it's aging 70% faster now than their ancestral strains, which is an empirical fact that they've proven. Uh, yet they have no excuse. They say, "See, that's proof it's evolving." What? That's going down. Not living as
Right.
long is not good.
Right. It's the complete opposite that they need.
Yeah, but what's funny to them, in their minds, that is proof. That's what I mean. That's when you know you're indoctrinated. When they can tell you something that's the exact opposite of what logical is, and you just believe it.
Right.
Right.
There's only 12
Exactly right.
strains of those bacteria. There's only 12, and half of them are hobbled with mutations that they back themselves into a corner where they can no longer even live in their original environment. That's a disaster.
Yeah. Thanks, mutation.
Yeah, good job. Where, yeah, where are the lungs or the gills that are supposed to be evolving on these things that can show they can become fish? Where's their photosensitivity showing that they're going to turn into all the plants and the trees? And where are the lungs that are going to form where that's going to prove that they're turning into humans? Right? That's what the bacteria supposedly did that formed all of life on planets, all the three different varieties, yet they haven't done anything except for back themselves into a corner.
And you think about it, this idea that mutation is the designer of all the fantastic structural designs and features of every living organism. That belief, once you examine what mutations actually do, to believe that is just absolutely absurd. How do these people actually convince themselves that it's true? It is so far from reality that it shows you how deep the mindset is that in them, the evolution absolutely must be true, because the alternative to it, which is creation, just can't be true. That's how far they reject it, that they're willing to believe that mutations design all these incredible things, that they can't be accepting that purely on scientific reasons. It's because it's in their mind, it absolutely has to be true, because the alternative to them is absolutely disgusting. They despise the idea of creation because that points to a moral authority, the creator. And since that idea can't be true in their heart, evolution has to be true. Mutations have to be this designer. And that shows you how crazy that kind of belief system really is. Evolution is the most nutty sort of belief, but you don't realize how nutty it is until you've studied it to find out. To that typical layperson in the world, they're naive. They don't really know what the scientific evidence is for and against it. They just go about believing, well, the scientists say evolution's true. It's science. That's what all the scientists say. So it's true. But then they don't, because they're willing to believe it because they don't really know much of anything about it. And when they're exposed to information that questions it, then you can start wheels turning in their minds. So do you have another question that you want to ask, Guzman? I don't know how many you have.
Yes. I only have a few.
Okay.
Um, I have some backup questions if these questions get answered shorter, but I'm pretty sure that we'll have enough time for these questions. Um, so I think you already answered what is genetic entropy. You gave a long explanation for that. Why or how does it debunk or disprove evolution? Why or how does genetic entropy debunk evolution?
Well, I think I've already answered that because I tend to be long-winded, but
Right.
succinctly, um, because mutations have been verified by countless research papers to cause a weakness, a deformity, or death. When scientists study mutation, the effect of mutation, and if you read the papers that they publish themselves, they almost always describe some negative effect that was observed due to the mutations that they induced into the whatever organism. It's usually bacteria or flies. Fruit flies are the famous one. What they love to experiment on is fruit flies, and because they have complex anatomies, and they can
Right.
see the results. So when they'll experiment with fruit flies by inducing mutation into them, and then they'll carefully study the organism and find out as much as possible what difference the mutation made in that organism, whether it's biochemical or whether it's a structural design, it's an anatomical, and they report that. What you'll find is in their own papers, they describe whenever they mutate these fruit flies or a bacteria. Typically, let's talk about the flies. What they observe is some kind of negative effect upon the fly. They'll get wings that are curled, or wings that are minuscule and not suitable for flight, wings that are malformed in some way, eyes that have changed in their color. Doesn't affect structural design, can't be used as evidence for evolution. Evolution posits that structural design changes. Colors is not going to help evolution. So, or they'll get gross deformities like a leg where an eyeball is supposed to be because of a mismatch of homeobox genes. A gene gets expressed in the wrong location of the body plan. The fly ends up being born with an eyeball where a leg where an eyeball is supposed to be, or an antenna where an eyeball is supposed to be, or it has minuscule legs that don't allow it to walk properly. Some kind of terrible thing. Now, not all mutations cause these terrible things. Much of the time, the fly will exhibit no visible change because of the mutation. Um, but whenever the mutation causes a change that is visible in the fly, it's always a negative, always. And so this, they report themselves about the negative effects, and they'll describe it in their science papers. But then they'll turn around and say that isn't it wonderful that mutations can cause the wings of a fly to get curled so that they can't fly anymore? Isn't that wonderful? Because that's what mutation, it changes the structural design of living things. That's how it made the fly. Are you kidding me? Mutations do this. So even in their own science papers, they describe the negative effects upon the structural design of the organism, but then they'll turn around and believe that it designed all those features. See, so there's a complete contradiction there. So the evidence from what effects the mutations have on organisms is consistent. When it produces a visible result, the effect is either has no effect on fitness that's detectable, or it's negative. Not any kind of building of any structural design in the organism's body plan. We don't see anything rising in any increments. So they report the evidence they produce themselves from their experiments show that mutations, whenever the effect is detectable, it's negative, not something that is a designer. Secondly, they have mutation is a lot has been learned about genetic mutation and the information in the genomes of living things, what mutations can do: block duplications, missense mutations, copy insertion mutations, deletion mutations. There's about 6 different major types of mutation, and what they've discovered is all of them cause a disruption of cell function and deformities. And so they produce the evidence that mutation is not a designer. They just refuse to accept the conclusion, which is that mutations denigrate things. They don't build and design things. So that's the evidence. It's produced by the secular camp. The ones that claim that evolution is true are the ones producing almost all of the evidence that refutes evolution theory, this idea that mutation is this designer. And another refuter of that is this. If mutation was this grand designer of all the structural designs of living things, then there would have been millions upon millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of transitional forms produced, actually many billions of transitional forms produced of living things in the history of evolution, but they're not in the fossil record. There's about a list of about 80, 100 organisms the evolutionists claim are transitional. But if you actually study the organism, you'll see that it doesn't actually show evolutionary transition. You have to imagine it and put your imagination to the fossil. See, so in truth, there are no known transitional forms. They're creatures the evolutionists can look at and imagine in their imagination. I can see how that fits in between these two, but one fossil by itself is not evidence. You need a series of them. You
Right.
can't show a fish and then a creature that's an amphibian and then a land-dwelling creature and say, see, the amphibian proves that the fish produced creatures that eventually came out on land. No, it doesn't. It just shows you there's fish, there's amphibians, and there's reptiles. That's all it shows. You have to believe that one fossil somehow shows the transition. So when you look at these evolutionary series of fossils, they don't actually show any transition. So if mutation was the designer of these features, the fossil record would be rife with transitional forms. There'd be an overwhelming abundance of them, but there isn't any. So that's not a problem. And then if evolution were true, it has to be going on now. You can't say evolution just ended. It stopped for some reason X million years ago, right?
Finally.
So if mutation were doing this, then it would be millions of transitional forms walking this planet right now. But there aren't any. So where are all these creatures with body plans that are in in transition that have features that are becoming into existence, or extant features which are being transformed so they have new biomechanical functions. Where are these body plans today? There aren't any. When you examine all the living things of this earth, from a dragonfly to a rhinoceros, what you'll find is all the features of these creatures are beautifully designed and marvelously functional. They're fantastically complex and they work. There's nothing that's coming into being in the body plan of any creature on the earth. That's exactly what we find about the fossil records. The same thing. None of these transitions in the fossil record, none living on the planet today. So, if this is a killer for the idea that mutation designs these features, because if it's not doing it today and it didn't do it in the past, so we have no evidence that mutation is a designer. All that we're left with is evidence from experimentation that mutations cause weaknesses, biochemical weaknesses, malformed proteins and disease, and stillbirth. That's all we have.
Right. Right, and I'd like to add a few things to a few points that you made. And Matt, if you want to jump in anytime, just
I took
interrupt.
notes. After you, go ahead. I'm taking notes.
All right, awesome. Well, you were giving the list of what all the kind of deformities that the flies had after they did that experiment on all the experiments on them, and don't forget they ended up having flies with no wings. They had flies with curved wings. They had flies with other wing shapes, but they also had flies with no wings. And
Yeah.
what do you call that now? A crawl or something? I don't know. But
A dead fly is what you call that.
right, especially if it has a especially if it has an eye where a leg is supposed to be. Yeah, that's gonna be
Well,
real useful, huh?
exactly. The point is that if you loose these creatures, you take them out of the laboratory where they've been malformed, and you put them in the natural environment, they die. They're,
They
they
don't survive a second.
they won't survive. They're a goner. They are a goner. So thanks mutation.
Yeah, leave God's creation alone, right?
Exactly. It was designed beautifully in the beginning, and it's going downhill.
Right. And also the Bible just says, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." I mean,
Exactly.
these people want to say, "Oh, we can create a better design for humans." Well, we already tested that on fruit flies, and you failed at it. Come on, look
There's a
into this,
marvelous
guys.
passage. I know Matt has some really cool stuff to say. He's really knowledgeable about this stuff too, and I want him to chime in. But I want to share with you a passage in the Bible that a lot of people are not really aware of. There is actually three passages in the Bible that refer to genetics. I want to share those with you. If you tell an atheist, they'll say, "No, that's nonsense. Nobody could have known." Well, man didn't know about genetics then. Of course not. But God's word knows because God inspired these words.
Right.
So here's one. Psalms 139:16. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. Now I'll read that real slow. This is an amazing statement, really. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, that is, not developed yet, okay, not brought to fruition, okay, and in thy book all my members were written. Now, what book writes all the members of a human's body? It's the information and the DNA package of information that defines those features. And as that organism develops in the womb, as a human being develops, the genetic information of its genome specifies how those body cells are going to specialize, what kind of tissue they're going to be, and where exactly they're going to be located in that body plan, so as to produce the limbs, the organs, and everything about a human being during the 9 months of gestation. So it says here, and in thy book all my members were written. What book is that? That's the book that is the DNA molecule, the information. It says, when in continuance were fashioned, in continuance, in this process of development, you see, they were fashioned, whereas yet there was none of them. So this passage is literally saying, all my features were described in your book of genetic information, that when I developed in my mother's womb, they were all produced by the information that was already prescribed them in my in my DNA. It's amazing. That's Psalms 139:16. And that is that was written about 600, I think, years before Christ.
Wow.
Can you believe that? And that's a statement of genetics. There's two more, and then I want to hear what Matt has to say. Matthew 10:30. But the very hairs on your head are all numbered. And Luke 12:7. But the very hairs on your head are numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. The hairs on your head are numbered, is twice it says in the New Testament. Why is that? Well, because today we understand that algorithms in the DNA and in the genetic material, algorithms prescribe what features are going to be where in the human body. And all your hair follicles are developed and organized on your body by an algorithm during your embryonic development. That's why they're numbered. What numbered them was that algorithm, that mathematical equation in your DNA that says produce this many in this location, and let's spray them out and spread them out all over here. And that's how come you have exactly how many you have, because that genetic algorithm determined how many hair follicles. It's a program. It's actually like a computer program, an algorithm, and it determined how many hair follicles are going to be on your body while you were developing. And so that's why the Bible says all the hairs on your head are numbered, because we're designed. God designed us, and that genetic algorithm is what determines how many hair follicles you'll have on your body while you were in your mother's womb.
It's good
Right.
perspective.
Good.
Like it.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. So, Matt, you wanna talk real quickly?
Sure. Here's some different. I picked up what Neff didn't say about mutations, or I'll hit it from a different angle as well. Maybe you'll like this argument. Mutations have a load, basically. I was writing this down. They build up in the system. We know that the minimum amount is about 63. The average is about 125. The maximum seems to be around 145 to 175, depending on the experiment. So they roughly average out to about 125. So that means that when you have a child one day, that child is going to have about 175 or 125 mutations that you didn't have. So now what we can do is we can go back in time, right? And we can do the math, and we can figure out how many mutations are inside of us before we get to the baseline, like what happens at the beginning, right? So if evolution was true, what happens is they did a prediction saying that the human mitochondrial will have about 21,500 mutations inside of it. But you can't see that far because the mtDNA will only go up to about 12,000, and then it caps out. It can't show more than that. So if evolution were true, all of the mitochondrial DNA in the world would show a mutation rate at 12,000, right? Because that's how everything's very, very old. But what do we find? We actually find that in humans, it's only 1,483. Very small amount. That's exactly in line with the predictions of young Earth creationism.
Yeah, so that fits with the genetic bottleneck created by the flood of Noah.
Exactly.
Mitochondrial Eve, which technically is actually it's closer to being Noah's wife than it is Eve in the Garden of Eden, because can't go back further than that, really. So yeah, that's the genetic bottleneck caused by the flood. We're starting with Noah and his wife and their sons and their wives, and that's as far back as we're going to be able to go.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we see. So with the evidence showing us that that's in line with what we say, and it's against what they're predicting, you would think that they would go, well, this is cause for concern, and they would have to come up with a rescuing device. So what they've actually done is they didn't come up with one. They just start using the trio dating method, which predicts a common ancestor. And by predicting the common ancestor, they've now just added that to the mathematical scenario so that they can negate using the D loop of the mitochondrial testing, because that's what shows everything being quite young. And if it shows it being young, then they'll just say, well, it's all over the place. We can't trust that dating method because it's different for each species. So they like using the other method because it's it shows that they can be biased and use the math predictions to get the outcome that they want. It's a total farce, is basically what it is. So that's another good one.
That's right. 100 mutations per generation per person. So that's roughly 100. It looks like it's going up. They think more like 125 now, maybe. So that means you'll have 100 mutations that your parents didn't have. And if you have children, your children will have 100 mutations or more that you don't have, and their children, and theirs, and theirs, and these are building up in our genomes. That is pretty rapid denigration of our genome. It's really rapid. What's called the mutation load. There's only so much of that an organism can stand before it simply becomes so defunct it goes goes extinct, and that's where we're headed.
Right.
Totally. You know, the more they unravel the genome, the more they discover that these mutations are all harmful. Like, there's no mutation that's beneficial for cancer, but guess what? There's the mutation for colon cancer, like L688L. There's a mutation for prostate cancer, PIK3C. There's the BRCA gene 1 and 2 for breast cancer. There's the lung cancer. There's the leukemia mutation. All of them are mutations. Almost everything that causes cancer is mutation related. So if there were beneficial mutations helping us to adapt to our environment, helping us to adapt to cancer, we would find them, and we don't. We only find new ones, and they're always a problem every time. There's 24,000 new deleterious mutations added to the human genome every single decade. Every year, there's 24,000 that are proven to go inside the genetic database. That's a disaster for them. I don't know how they're going to get around it.
Right. Yeah, so yeah, I can't even add anything to that.
The problem just gets worse, and the secular camp is the one that provides most of the evidence that mutations are a destroyer of us. For example, Kondrashov, Lynch, Higgins, and Lowe, other scientists have discovered that direct selection against deleterious mutations is insufficient to halt the mutation accumulation. Negative mutations are building up in the genomes of every living thing. These studies have been conducted for a long time, ever since the 1930s. Haldane was one of the first, and he scratched his head and wrote, I can't fix the problem. I don't know how to solve it, because mutations seem to degrade organisms, and the rate is just increasing. They're building and building and building in the genome of living things. There's nothing that can stop it. Natural selection can't remove the building up of mutation. It can't stop the mutation load. That was back in the 1930s that Haldane was discussing it. Now, all the scientific evidence since then has just confirmed it. There's been no solution. Ota was one of the most famous, and Kalmura, two Japanese scientists who studied mutation, demonstrated the very same thing. Most deleterious mutations have extremely small negative effect on fitness, but are invisible to natural selection. So the individual mutation is invisible to natural selection. Natural selection can't remove it unless it causes such a powerfully negative effect in the organism, like a terrible disease, or it causes a grotesque physical deformity, then that natural selection would be able to see the effect of the mutation and then weed that individual out. Natural selection selects entire organisms, not mutants, not individual mutations, unless that one mutation is so profoundly negative that that individual is unfit for survival and will be weeded out. The vast majority of mutations produce a very slight deleterious effect, and therefore not visible to natural selection, and therefore they're just building up and up and up in the genome of every living thing, because natural selection can't see them. And these studies have been conducted since Ota did one in 73, another in 74, and another in 92, and another in 2002. Kimura did one in 1979, another in 1983, and they came to the same conclusion. Natural selection can't see the typical mutation, even if it causes a slightly negative effect. It just can't see it. So then mutations are building. There's no mechanism to remove them. Natural selection would be the only potential mechanism to get rid of the mutations that are building up. But since natural selection can't see the typical mutation, even if it causes a slightly destructive effect to the DNA, they keep building up and building up and building up. And that means genetic entropy, which modern evolutionists today are in denial of. They have to deny it because it proves the mutation is a destroyer, not a designer.
Right,
Oh,
and they have to acknowledge uh design how do you say it it slipped out of my head just now. They have to admit a designer at some point, whether it be aliens or something else or whatever. Even though
I,
I can't think of any other.
I think
But
so. I think they're stuck with having to. Let's put it like this: if Jesus Christ doesn't come back in the next 50 years, they'll still be proclaiming evolution, probably.
right,
But if Jesus Christ doesn't come back in the next 100 or 150 years, they're probably not going to be saying evolution anymore. They're going to be saying, well, we were designed, but the Christians are wrong. It's not God. And the Hindus are wrong.
exactly.
It's no gods. There's no gods that designed us. It's aliens. Can't you see? The universe is so ginormous. There has to be countless civilizations out there. And somehow they were able to get to this planet and seed life here. So we have a designer, but it's not God. That's where they'll be going. They'll never acknowledge God as the creator unless all the atheists that have authority in the scientific community stop, unless there are no more atheists in the scientific community right now. And for the last 100 years or more, atheists have ruled the scientific community because they operate, they possess they fill key positions in academia, where they get to determine who's in the club and who's not, what goes into a college or high school textbook. It's atheists. Now, the only way that creation could ever come into be published in a college or university textbook, high school textbook, is if the atheists stop holding key positions in academia. I don't expect that to happen, but so they're going to be stuck with believing that that we're designed with that we're designed, acknowledging it at some point in the future, maybe distantly. They'll have to. They can't deny the scientific evidence forever because the evidence that our knowledge is just increasing, our technology is increasing, and it's going to continue to provide overwhelming evidence that mutation is a destroyer, not a designer, and therefore evolution is false. So they're going to say that they're going to do a kind of a theistic evolution. This is my opinion. They're going to do a kind of a theistic evolution instead of a god, though. It's aliens who twerked evolution to make it happen, and they'll have to say it happened more and more and more times to account for all the features of every living thing. But now, what most people don't realize is that back in the early 1800s, from the early to the mid 1800s, atheistic scientists committed what you could call a coup. A coup, a political coup, is where members of a particular faction get enough military guys on their side, and they rush in and kick the president out of his chair, and they arrest him, and they take him away, and they take over the government. That's a coup, right? Well, atheists did the same thing in the scientific community in the early to mid 19th century, where they kicked out basically all of the creationist academics out of the scientific community and took over the ruling bodies of science, and got rid of the young Earth creationists out of key positions in academia. And when they did that, they took it over, and now they had control, and they could start promoting evolution theory and making millions of people believe it and put it in the school books. Prior to that, there was a large number, in fact, the majority of scientists in 1815 or 20 were creationists. In 1850, it wasn't that way anymore. The majority of scientists in key academic positions was very high. It was almost all atheists because they performed a coup. It works like this. Let's say you run a business and you're a racist person and you don't like Hispanic people. Okay, let's say you're a person that's a racist and you own a business, and so you open your business and you hire just a bunch of people, and you've got Latinos in it, and you've got white people, and you've got black people in it. But since you're a racist person and you don't like Latinos, you stop hiring Latinos. And eventually, as the ones that work for you end up getting fired or quit, what happens is your business no longer has Latinos working for it. That's how you weed them out. See, and that's what they did in academia and the scientific community, was by refusing to allow Christians or creationists to have key positions or important positions in academia and the scientific community over time, and they just ended up getting rid of them. And they still have a stranglehold on it to this day. That will change eventually. It may take another 100 years. It could be 50. It might be 150. Don't know. But it will change over time, I think. But I don't expect them to be creationists. I expect them to still hold to some kind of a designer, but it won't be God, because those people are not going. The world is moving, continuously becoming more anti-Christian all the time. And the Bible told us this would happen, and the Revelation tells us it's going to happen. So that's where we're headed. They probably will eventually acknowledge we are designed, but they'll never give the credit to God.
No, they have ridiculous theories. Matter of fact, they believe that life came on the back of crystals called life seeds. That's
right.
Ridiculous. Another good one is because octopus and squid have genes that are not found in other creatures on this world, they believe that they came from meteors. That's a fun one.
Right.
Ridiculous. When they figure out that epigenetics is like actually what they're seeing when they're looking at these mutations, these so-called mutations, they're going to realize that they've lost all their beneficial mutations, because so far almost everything that they've actually found that they thought was a beneficial mutation in a human being hasn't been a beneficial mutation at all. It's just epigenetic regulation. So that's going to be a huge disruptive force, because that's just a new field of science that they're getting into right now.
Right. Charles Darwin, good night. Not Charles Darwin. Richard Dawkins even said that there might be some kind of signature of some sort of designer in our DNA. There might be a signature, and you might find evidence for that.
They definitely admit to seeing intelligent design. They say it seems like it's intelligently designed, but that's as far as they go. They end it right there.
Right. They'll probably go as far as to say maybe aliens have created us, or some extraterrestrial life form has set a seed of life on Earth. It happened to be this planet, right? But yeah, people are gullible. And I don't like to reference atheists that much, because a lot of people get mad at me, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Okay, so Matt Dillahunty, he's a famous atheist. He does. I'm pretty sure you guys heard of him, right?
Yeah, I know who he is.
Well, yeah. I was watching a debate between him and another guy that happened recently, and he said in that debate, extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. And I'm like, oh, good night. This guy believes in evolution. Where's his extraordinary evidence? Right? And I think we've covered a lot of extraordinary evidence tonight alone.
Well, that's actually a myth that you'll hear atheists say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That's actually false.
Right.
All that's required is evidence. There's no such thing as extraordinary evidence. There's only evidence, right? So that's a straw man. It's a goalpost move attempt by the atheist to say you need extraordinary evidence because your claim is extraordinary. No, my claim is simply what it is, and I don't need anything called extraordinary evidence. All I need is evidence. So that's a myth. That's a misrepresentation of the truth. There's no such thing as extraordinary evidence. There's just evidence.
And what I tell them is that we don't owe them any evidence at all. We're the majority. They're the minority. Where in the world does that ever happen, where the minority says to everybody else, you owe us an explanation? What are you talking about? We were believers from the beginning.
Right.
It was something new.
Right.
Right.
You know, I
Right.
mean, they're making the claim that God doesn't exist. So what evidence do they have for that? Since they're new,
Right. Right. Yeah, in uh, in in 1500 AD, you could probably fit all the atheists in the world in the one auditorium of a college university, in the bleachers. That's about how many there were, probably. Then about 1820, there's probably tens of thousands of atheists in the world. But since then, now there's millions of atheists. They are the newcomers on the block. They're the ones with the claim. Uh, People have always believed in creation and in the existence of God, whether they believed in the one true God or they believed in a false one. They were theists, you know. So the atheists are the new kid on the block. You're exactly right.
Right. I got a copy actually of On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, published by Penguin, and the description on the back of the book, it said Darwin's idea is still attacked by religious religious people over the years, and I say,
Yeah.
well, we're attacking you. You guys attacked us. I mean,
Oh, give them a tissue.
right, right. We we're attacking you. I mean, I don't remember punching anyone.
Yeah, an attack on reality is what they're trying to make it look like. Look,
Right,
the simple thing is they uh you know, if you compared with their belief system to ours, it just doesn't stand up. There's nothing rational, logical, or scientifically plausible about atheism. Nothing. The existence of everything points to creation. Mustard proves creation. Cheese proves creation. How do you get mustard?
right,
Well, it's a seed. It's ground up. Where'd the seed come? It's got DNA in it. DNA. Uh, DNA proves creation. You know, everything, the molecular forces of the universe, how balanced they are, proves creation, because it couldn't have ordered itself to such nth degree. It just is not logical. But they have to believe something, but they'll believe anything but God, especially Christ. They'll believe in anything but Christ,
right.
because the
Well,
cross of Jesus Christ is the most offensive thing in the world. Because
right,
it says to you, you're the one who deserves to have been nailed to that thing, not Jesus. That idea is totally abhorrent to an atheist's heart. No way am I going there. That's what they say in their own heart. See, so the creationism is despised by atheists because, of course, it points to God.
right. And the Bible says in Romans chapter 1, um they're without excuse. We've covered a lot tonight. It's almost 10 in my time, so we're gonna start wrapping things up pretty soon. But the Bible says that they're willingly ignorant, and Romans chapter 1 especially says that they are without excuse. God has made it known unto them. Uh, they did not want to retain God in their knowledge. God gave them over to a reprobate mind.
That's right. It says
They
that scoffers would come in the last days. They would deny creation in the flood. And that's
right,
exactly what they do, isn't it?
right, and that's a prophecy right there, huh?
It's a fulfilled prophecy, indeed.
Right, fulfilled prophecy. Yeah, they're going to deny the creation and the flood, and the flood is also reflecting on the coming judgment, which, boy, the atheists get mad about that.
Right. They don't want to believe themselves guilty of sin, so they'll have to deny God.
Yeah, so let's just rush through these questions really quickly. I have like
Yeah,
four more
sure.
questions.
I'll try to be quick when I answer.
All right. Um, what are evolutionists' favorite pieces of evidence to support their theory? debunked. How do you debunk them?
Okay. The first is the idea that fish evolved into land dwelling amphibian tetrapods. An amphibian tetrapod is a creature with four limbs. Um, and they use a couple of creatures, Acanthostega, Ichthyostega, Tiktaalik rosea, and Pandorixis. It's a few fish that are lobe finned, and the lobe fins get bigger, and then poof, there's a creature with legs. So that's been their favorite. It's been debunked by numerous people. I wrote an article that debunks it myself on my blog called what Darwin Didn't Know, called Ichthyostega, the End of Creative License. So that's been refuted because there simply isn't evidence for the physical transition in the bones. The evolutionists today love to harp on about bacterial immunity. Look, genetic change occurs, thus evolution is true. Well, change doesn't equal evolution. I can smash a car to pieces with a sledgehammer. It doesn't mean it's becoming something else. It's changing, but it's not becoming something else. So immunities in bacteria don't change the structural design of the bacteria. Therefore, they don't support evolution theory because that's what evolution claims. So that's debunked because it doesn't do what evolutionists claim it does. This idea that genetic change occurs, thus evolution is true, is it's a uh, um, that's a bait and switch tactic. It's not true. So uh, today, another claim is that they found a series of bones in certain creatures where they claim that show evidence that a bone from the ear migrated to become part of the lower jaw in reptiles, in early mammals. I mean, and but that's ridiculous. Lots of problems with that. How does the organism go without? I mean, from the jaw into the ear. I had it backwards. A bone just moves from just dislodges from the jaw and becomes some of these little bitty bones, the temper bones in the ear that vibrate and cause sound waves for the nerve to pick up impulses so that you can hear. They're little tiny, very specific bones inside your ear. And they'll say, this is what happened. But there's all kinds of problems with that. How does a bone get migrated into the ear, supposedly already working, to become a better ear? It's just crazy, crazy idea. That's debunked because of the illogical reasoning,
Right.
the faulty reasoning of it.
Right.
And the physical evidence doesn't actually show the migration of the bone. They say that it does, but again, they're applying their imagination to the fossil. So that's another one. Um, uh, let's see. Well, they just point to just about everything, and let's see. The Ernst Haeckel put forth in the 1800s an idea called phylogeny. I've forgotten the name of it. Um, Ontology of related to ontology, where he showed that the structures in a human being show that we stages of evolution to prior human creatures are evidence of evolution because there's these little flaps in the skin along the neck of the developing human being, which were remnant of gills when we were once fish. But now we know that one of them becomes the voice box and the other becomes the lower jaw. So they never had anything to do with respiratory breathing. So that's debunked. So, there's a number of them. Those are a couple that come off top of my head.
Right. And I was reading an article the other day, National Geographic, and they they had just made a recent discovery supposedly of the finger bone of a ancient human from I forgot when. I think like 4 million years ago or something. I don't remember. But have you heard of that? No.
He might have went AFK.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ask me again briefly. What's the question? I'm sorry. I was reading something.
Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. So I was reading an article on National Geographic one time, and they had recently discovered some human ancestor from
Hmm.
about 4 or 6 million years ago. I forget the
Right.
date. I'm not sure. Have you heard about that?
Well, there's been a number of them. I mean, there's Ardipithecus ramidus, there's Australopithecus sediba. There's been a number. They keep finding bones they claim are ancestors of humankind, but all those bones show is that they're an extinct species of ape, typically chimpanzee. One of them was orangutan. Uh, uh, and they found one that they thought was in fact it's been discovered that uh, one of the bones in the Lucy famous Lucy fossil, some paleontologists now are saying that's an orangutan bone. It's not even,
Right.
yeah, so I mean, you know, they keep coming up with they'll keep putting forth the arguments, but they'll never have the evidence.
They're picking at straws.
Yeah, these
Um,
creatures just show these supposed hominids. All they show is that they're apes. That's all. I could go into the features. You don't have the time, I know, right now, but they don't show any kind of transition to mankind. They show only that they're apes.
right. And I found the article. Um, National Geographic. This was April 10th this year. They found a species of animal called Homo luzonensis. Supposedly a new common ancestor find for human common ancestry, whatever. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't heard of that
Anybody?
particular one. I'm not sure why I haven't heard of it, but no, I haven't heard of that particular one. But I'm sure if you study it, you'll find it's nothing but an ape, just like the rest.
All right, nothing new.
Right? It'll either
Yep.
be fully human or it'll be an ape, but it won't be something in between.
Right,
Even many atheist paleontologists, anatomists, zoologists have acknowledged that the evidence for man's evolution from a hominid, you could fit the bone pieces into a shoebox. That's how much there is, and you have to apply your imagination to them. So,
right, and um, the discoverer of Lucy. I forgot his name. What was his name?
Lucy was Australopithecus afarensis.
The discoverer of Lucy.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Oh, I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
yeah. So anyway, um, this guy's a hater of God. There was an anti-God conference a few years ago, and he was a speaker there, and he said that we need to worship the true Creator, Mother Nature, and we need to get the name of God off our money.
No, I
Blah
don't
blah
doubt it.
blah.
Yeah, well, there's a number of easily. Here's another one that's been debunked. Rhodocetus, a scientist named Gingrich, produced a mock-up, a reconstruction of a creature called Rhodocetus, and they only had certain amount of the bones for the creature, not a full fossil. And he had the reconstruction show that it had a blowhole in the top of its muzzle, and said, well, the blowhole eventually would migrate to the top of the head where it began when producing whales in the invention. This was a transitional to whales, and it had a fluke tail in the reconstruction. Well, guess what? They found the rest of the fossil. They found a nearly complete Rhodocetus fossil, and it did not have a blowhole in its head, and it did not have a fluke tail like a whale. So he was left with egg on his face. Rhodocetus is now out of the evolutionary transition book because it was a fraud. So that's another one
Right,
that's been relatively recently debunked.
right,
I
and
like
you
I
go.
like the ones when they I pretty much get all angles like you do, Neff. People come at you to prove evolution in every field of science. My favorite is when they use the fossil record. I'm like, okay, since you love the fossil record so much, then how come there are no meteors in the fossil record deep down? Right? If Earth supposedly
Right,
formed from meteor bombardment and lavas and volcanoes, why aren't there meteors everywhere? We find more fossils of animals than we do meteorites. That's a
Right.
physical impossibility if evolution was true.
Absolutely. The Earth would have had to have been bombarded over millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of years. That's a good question. Where are they? Well, what we have is a geologic column built of, comprised of sedimentary strata with clear, distinct boundaries, particle size distribution, and created by the flood of Noah. And so, of course, it can't be chock full of asteroids, or because it was created during the flood,
Exactly.
not over a period of hundreds of millions of years. That's
Right.
why
And
that's why there's the absence of these asteroids in the fossil record. That's why there's an absence of bioturbation in the fossil record as well.
Yeah, and
right.
they a lot of people say, well, how come then when we do use radiometric dating, how come that's all wrong? How come everything dates really old? Well, that's a biased interpretation because what they're actually doing is they're testing in a way that's a lie. Meaning everything in nature is going down. It's called entropy. We know that things are going down the periodic table, but when they actually test using radiometric dating, they're testing the daughter to parent nuclide rather than the other way around, which would actually show the correct results and they would get young results. That's why they don't test with it, and that's why they avoid helium dating as well, because they say, oh, helium's just too hard to date with. Well, actually, no, it's because it shows that the Earth is 6,000 years old. So it just doesn't align with what they want to represent to you, so they just don't show you.
Right.
Right.
And that's an excellent point that you brought out about the meteorites, the meteors. And I
Meteorites. Yeah, I
right,
said asteroids. I meant meteorites. Right.
right.
Mhm.
And I was in a debate with someone, and I brought up the iridium uh KT boundary, and I want to ask you guys about this. But
Mhm.
you know, they have this layer supposedly has iridium in it, and this was caused by the ginormous 6 foot long in diameter meteorite that crashed into the Earth 65 million years ago. Blah blah blah. They had to pull out the
Right.
big numbers, right? Um, and I asked him, if this supposedly killed almost 90% of life on Earth, then why don't we find any fossils inside this iridium layer in this KT boundary? No fossils at all. Zero. No lizards. No nothing. Why
Mhm.
don't we find anything?
Well, that's a good question. The iridium layer. This is my opinion about what created it. When God split the foundations of the earth open, the crust split the crust, and the waters that caused the crust came bursting forth out of the earth with enormous pressure. Enormous pressure that brought minerals and everything that was inside the earth, including countless tons of sand, were created by God's process. Uh,
Right.
the, and so this is what poured this iridium out onto the continents in a layer during a early stage of the flood of Noah. It was the iridium was in the earth, and the floodwaters of the earth hit a deposit or a layer of iridium that God put inside the earth and washed it out onto the surface of the earth, creating an iridium layer during the flood of Noah. That's where we got this iridium from.
Right.
That's
And
the K2 boundary right there. It wasn't an asteroid. It was it was a layer of iridium brought forth out onto the surface of the earth by the waters that flooded the earth, which came from within the earth.
right, and that's a good explanation because because latest scientific research shows that there's actually amounts of iridium inside the core and mantle of the earth. And so maybe there was more of that back before the flood, like what you said. In the crust, there was probably a lot of iridium, and then that was washed out by the fountains of the deep breaking open. And it's being spread all over the world from 4 centimeters to 16 centimeters. That's a good explanation, and yeah. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, the layers are just such a ridiculous thing because you can go to the Grand Canyon and you can look at some of these layers like the KT boundary and you can actually see where it's much lower in one section right next to like literally attached to another section that's much higher. So when there's such big discrepancies in the fossil record, it shouldn't be a reliable source. I mean, almost everything that's in the fossil record, I think 95% of it are all aquatic. Only 5% consist of land animals. So when they build these charts, they're just making it up. It's just as much as, you know how they find dinosaur bones when they go to Antarctica? They just walk around and look. They don't dig anywhere. They've never dug in Antarctica. They walk around and they find dinosaurs laying on the ground. So why in the world do they think that that happened 65 million years ago? You got to be out of your mind. They just got brushed over. They died and they sat there and corroded. Everything ate away their flesh and their bones were left. Easy.
Right, right, yum. Yeah. So yeah, I guess we'll be shutting this down soon. Well, thanks guys for taking time out of your schedules to come on here. I know it was sort of like a late um uh last second thing to have you on, Matt, but I'm glad you came on because yeah.
Thank you. Thanks
Well,
for having
thanks
me.
for having us,
Thank,
Guzman. Appreciate it.
thanks, you know.
I hope people get to watch this video and it'll have some kind of impact on people's thinking.
Thanks. So, you have any final thoughts? Anything that you want to plug in?
Share it with your school friends.
Excuse me?
Share it
Oh,
with your
share it.
school friends. Get them to start questioning evolution.
All right. Yeah,
Great. Thanks for having me.
no problem. I'm glad you were able to come on.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having us. See you next
Thanks.
time.
Yep.
All right.
See you next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Later.
Bye.